Hello and welcome once again to the Rhythm Changes podcast. I'm your host, Chris Fraser. Today, my guest is a modest, nonetheless monumental figure in the Vancouver jazz scene today, Dave Sikula. Dave is a superb guitarist known for his work with the Nightcrawlers and the Inhabitants, and he will be featured on New York organist Brian Charette's upcoming record, You Don't Know Jack, available December 6th through the Cellar Live record label. In addition to his renowned guitar prowess, Dave also is a highly sought-after audio engineer and producer working out of Monarch Studios and Demitone Productions in Vancouver, frequently with the Cellar Live record label. If you've heard jazz that was recorded or produced in Vancouver in the last 15 years or so, there's a fair chance that Dave Sikula was involved. I was happy to sit down with him at Demitone Productions in the Kensington Cedar Cottage neighborhood in Vancouver to chat for a while. Please enjoy. I'm here with David Sikula. David Sikula. We were just talking about how there's another Dave Sikula, David Sikula. Does he go by David?
He goes by Dave Sikula.
He goes by, right, yeah, he goes by Dave. You go by Dave, but because he was first onto Facebook in the year like 2008.
As Dave Sikula, I went with David.
He won the Dave Wars. In 2008, the great Dave Wars of 2008. There's probably a lot of stories like that from around that time.
Maybe.
Although I don't remember running into another Chris Fraser when I signed up. But there are a lot of Chris Frasers out there.
I can only imagine.
When I used to have an office job, and there was another Chris Fraser who worked in the building, and sometimes my schedule would be I'd be at work, and then suddenly my schedule says that I'm away. I'm like homesick. And then it turned out that the other Chris Fraser had called in sick, but they accidentally changed my schedule to sick. And then the next day, so I come in and someone's like, "Are you okay?" Like, yeah, I'm fine. But I never got to meet him. But you're going to be meeting Dave Sikula.
I am going to be meeting Dave Sikula in January. Yeah, for the first time.
Did you? So like, did you become friends because you just had to keep sending each other your email?
Well, yeah. Essentially, I would sometimes. Well, he more often than the other way around. He would get email that was destined for me.
Yeah.
And likewise, I've got a few messages that were destined for him as well. So we became friends on Facebook and start. You know, anytime this would happen, we'd chat on Facebook and then eventually exchanged email so we could pass these messages back and forth. But and then we just got to chatting and we actually had a long, talk about the last name. It's not a very common last name, particularly in North America. It's much more common in
where would that be? Yeah, Sikula. Is that
Slovak? I want to say.
Okay.
Am I wrong about that?
It could be. Yeah, it sounds like it almost sounds Italian.
Well, it does, yeah. And in fact, an Italian friend of mine said it's very similar to an Italian word, but that's spelled differently. But I should know more about my family history. But I did look a few years ago when I was looking at the name, and I think there's an actual town called Sikula.
Oh wow.
Yeah, with an umlaut over the. I think that's what it's called.
Wait, you said Sikula. Is it pronounced Sikula?
Well, that's how they pronounce it over there. Yeah. And in fact, another fun fact, if you see Inspector Gadget in that language, Inspector Gadget is actually Inspector Sikula. And you can actually look that up on YouTube.
Really?
The theme song is Inspector Sikula for Inspector Gadget. Just a fun fact.
Wow, that's a really fun fact.
So I think the reason for that is somebody told me it means handyman in that language.
Oh, wow.
Which I'm not.
You are. I mean, I think you are a handyman. I think you're an audio-based handyman.
Okay. Let's I'll buy that.
Yeah. You were just describing some handiwork you're doing at CAP right now.
Yes.
AV handiwork. But we don't have to get into work right now. That's fine. Although to get into like at least not work, but I was just I did want to talk to you about this Brian Charette record that's coming out. It sounds awesome. Like there's only 2 tracks out right now as singles, right?
2 singles out. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's you're on that with Cory Weeds and John Lee, and then of course Brian Charette on organ, right?
Yes. Yeah.
When was that session?
Well, actually, I should have looked that up again. I think Brian was here in, I think it was April of 2024. So just a few months ago. And as Cory will often do when he's putting together a new band or some guests from, say, New York or elsewhere.
Yeah.
He'll book a few dates, not necessarily all in Vancouver. So if you can find something on the island or elsewhere, and then also maybe book 1 or 2 nights at Frankie's.
Yeah.
And and then do the recording session after you've had a chance to go through the material. It tends to come out a lot better that way.
Totally,
that way people had a chance to warm up on the material. So that's exactly what he did in this case. He brought Brian in last April, and we he had a date booked in Powell River.
Okay.
And so that would have been well, we'd played together before. So I've actually been playing off and on with Brian since about 2016, I think.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Cory brought Brian through, every couple of years since
there's another record on Cellar, at least another one that he did with Ed Cherry on guitar.
That's right. Yeah. So that was in 2022, I think they did that. So just sort of the tail end of the COVID period. And they did that actually at Van Gelder Studios.
Oh, wow. Cool.
In Englewood Cliffs in 2022. But yeah, so Cory had brought Brian through, I think, 2016, maybe around 2018, 2019. And also, just before that record that you just mentioned, which is called Jackpot. I think.
That's right. Yeah.
Jackpot. We played a bunch of that music with Brian, and John Lee was on drums at that point. Before that, it was Julian McDonough on drums. So we had played as that quartet. We did a live stream for, at the Shadbolt. For Cory at that point with
the
that
live
group.
stream era.
Yeah.
Did you set that up?
No.
No, okay.
No, I did not. So that was all Ken, I think largely Ken Burke and his team.
Okay, cool.
Ken is, he's a wizard of in many disciplines, audio, video, photography. He does it all. And he sorted that out. So.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense actually, because it does sound like you've played together, because the sort of the sensibility seems to be very consistent. Everybody is really, it sounds like you're all on the same page with like the way everything is supposed to sound and like the approach. It's a really like groovy, like gelled sounding ensemble.
Well, I'm happy to hear that coming from you, Chris, because because I know that you play in this instrumentation,
sure,
every chance you can get as well.
Yeah,
and it's I don't know if you feel the same way, but it's almost like a different sort of bag than
of course.
A lot of other things that we end up doing, especially as guitarists. It's really unique, and the thing that I always like about it is that. Of course, it's always fun to play with piano players as well.
Yep.
And keyboardists, regardless of the instrument that they're playing. But with the organ, generally speaking, they're handling the bass.
Yep.
And then they've got whatever's going on with the right hand, so they're either comping or they're playing the melody or single note soloing. So once they're playing the bass line, once they're single note soloing, there's this room for the guitar all of a sudden to you've got this job,
Right. It does kind of like you have this job when you're in the organ trio where you go from being a horn and almost and a lot of the time in an organ trio setting, like the organ really is like the jewel of the group, right? And so you're really sort of everything you're doing is in complement to the organ, and even when you're playing the melody, like you're doing it in a way where like the organ can really like hold things down, right? and then as soon as you get the chance, like you can comp in ways like in an organ trio that you can't really get away with when you're playing with a piano player.
It's true.
Like
it's very true.
Like you can get really funky with it, right? Like you can get kind of strummy and percussive, and that's something I love about. I think because it's idiomatic to like that era too, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Well, that's the thing. There's such a history, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, which is, I mean, arguably, like, you know, for Brian, it's obviously, you know, you can tell by the name of his last two records. I mean, Jackpot. It's also a tribute to Jack McDuff.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know, play on words with the title, and this one as well. You don't know Jack is the name of the album as a whole.
Yeah.
And Brian actually, I didn't know this until recently, but he actually, according to him, he learned to play on Jack McDuff's organ.
Whoa.
Yeah. So he would go down to this session. I think it was
Wow.
it was uptown, or maybe it was in Harlem. I don't quote me on the location, but
Mm-hmm.
but the organ that they had in house, it was apparently Jack McDuff's organ.
Wow.
So that's the real organ he learned on. So he bought an organ emulation keyboard of some sort,
Sure.
just so he could gig on it wherever.
Yeah.
But he would go to this session, and that's the organ that he learned on. But he obviously kind of went deep down that, and you know, there's no avoiding. I think for any one of those guys, Jimmy Smith was sort of the father of the language of it.
Yeah.
But Jack McDuff was very much
For sure.
a strong influence, you know, at that point, along with, you know, many others. But according to Brian, like Jack was his guy.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And which guitar players were playing with Jack?
So, well, early on, of course, young George Benson.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, you're getting there's a couple of moments where I'm like, this sounds like George, like
Well,
you're trying to do a George thing, or
I don't know,
or
man.
not you're trying, but like, you know, you're.
Yeah.
That's coming out.
That's
like you're
yeah.
listening to the records and it's like coming out of like you're playing, and yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. I mean, George is like, you know, as far as I'm concerned, is like a superhuman. I mean,
he absolutely is. Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's nice to hear, because at quite a young age, before, I mean, even at the point where I wasn't really playing a lot in the way of jazz,
Yeah.
I was listening to a lot of that music, and some of the early, you know, things that really that I was getting excited about were those organ jazz records, Jimmy Smith records, the Jack McDuff records. As soon as I discovered, there was like a double album, Hot Barbecue, I think they were calling it. But I think the CD I had two records with the same band, which was Joe Dukes on drums, Jack McDuff on organ, George Benson on guitar, and Red Holloway on saxophone.
Okay.
And I fell in love with those records, and particularly the way that George was playing. But George, you know, I think he was in maybe his late teens even when he started, maybe 19 or something even.
Yeah, he was super young
when he started playing with Jack. But George's sound and his comping and everything, it was like, oh man, just to this day, absolutely mind blowing. You know,
George, I think, well, in a similar way for me, like George was also a big part of my introduction to this music, because I was interested when I started playing guitar. I was really interested in blues music and a lot of stuff from the late 60s, like Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton, and so naturally, like George Benson just sort of appears eventually. The more guitar players you get into around that time, he just sort of, he just appears out of nowhere, and you're like, what is this? This is something completely different, and I love it, and it's so tasty, and it's so impressive, and it's like, and he was really, you know, riding the line of like genre for a while. I mean, like he was on what's that Miles Davis record, Miles in the Sky? Like he's on that. Like it's kind of amazing, that era of George Benson, where he's like kind of like moving in every direction at once. And he was a huge influence on me as well. And it's so cool to hear actually that like, you know, you felt the same way about him when you were getting started too. And I feel like that's a lot of guitar players like who play jazz, and especially who like to play in that style, like the organ trio stuff. Like George really is like an important figure. Yeah, man.
I would agree 100%.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's still with us too.
I know.
What a career, you know.
I mean, he's not even that old. Like I think he's only got to be close to 80 years old. Maybe he just turned 80.
I think he's around 80. Yeah, I don't know if you saw, but he's like liquidating a bunch of his guitars on reverb.
Oh, is he really?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. He's
well,
but I mean, you know, I think George, like from the sounds of it, it seems like he just wants to kind of, you know, make sure that they're played, and then he gives them back to the community, that they fall in the right hands. You know,
I mean, he's a guitar player's guitar player in that way. Like,
oh yeah.
Did I ever tell you I got to meet him once? Did you? Yeah. This is a funny story. This was, I think, in 2013. He came to Vancouver for the Jazz Fest. I remember going and seeing, I think it was the Chris Terry group at CBC Studios. And a bunch of people from CAP were all there, and we went to go see Chris Terry, and it was amazing show. I remember going up and like talking to Pete McCann afterwards and like nerding out over his playing and stuff, and then finding out that he was just playing through a I think it was like a Digitech multi-effects unit, and it just made it sound unbelievable. But anyway, yeah, shout out to Pete McCann. But yeah, so we go see that show. I meet up with some other people I know from CAP who are there. Mealy Hong, who I recorded with here 8 years ago. We can talk about that later. She's on Facebook on her phone, and she sees a friend of ours from CAP. She happened upon some tickets to the George Benson show that was happening in like 45 minutes from then. And she posted on Facebook like, "Hey, does anyone want to come to this George Benson show? I have 2 free tickets." And then Mealy shows me the screen. I'm like, "Okay, let's go. Like, message her back. Let's go to this show. I need to go see her, or go see George Benson." And so we go. We march up to the Vogue, I believe. Was either the Vogue or the Orpheum. Like that part is a blur to me. But we go and meet our friend Carolyn and her husband. Her husband knew the Ibanez rep for Vancouver, and he couldn't make to the show, and he had 4 tickets, and so he gave it to her husband. Her husband goes, picks up the tickets at will call, comes back, and he has 4 backstage passes. So we end up seeing this amazing show. I think, yeah, George was like 69 at the time. It's like a 2.5 hour show, and he does an encore. When he came back from the encore, he changed his outfit. So he was wearing this one outfit for the whole show. I think he was wearing like a white suit or something. And then he leaves, he comes back for an encore, and he's wearing this like emerald sequin Baptist minister gown. And then he plays like 5 more tunes. And one of them is like a solo rendition of Danny Boy, which like blew my mind. It was so amazing. And then the show finally ends. We go down to the stage. There's a lady with a clipboard there, and she says, "Are you all friends of George?" And we said, "Yes, absolutely, we are. Yeah, of course." And then we go like behind the stage, like this cave behind the stage, or it's like a weird little tunnel behind the stage, and we go up the stairs, and it's like a locker room that has like a table with canapes and like drinks set up and stuff. And a bunch of other people are waiting in there. And then George comes in, he's wearing his 3rd outfit of the night, which is a golf shirt under a sport coat. And there's 2 women with him, and he has a glass of champagne. And then he just holds court for 45 minutes and just like tells stories. And he's like so genial. He has such amazing stories. Maybe I'll get to one on another podcast, but I don't want to take up too much time talking about this. But I remember one thing, he like talked to me, and I was like, "Hey, I was amazed, Mr. Benson." You know, I tried to like say something to him, and I told him that I play guitar, and he told me all guitarists are brothers, and I'm like, that doesn't surprise me. That like, you know, he's just like, I need these guitars to get played, because he can't play them all, and he, you know. He's just he is like actually a very kind of like avuncular, like down to earth guy, even though he is like so like he's like superhuman, like you said, but like, and yeah, like he does have like that kind of like weird like superstar presence. Like if you've ever seen that, like he's like a statue.
Yeah.
He's like a moving statue. Like there's something uncanny about the way he looks, but he's so charming. He's so amazing. And, yeah. And he seemed to like, I don't know. I think he meant it when he said that. Like he just loves the guitar, man. You can tell.
No, he does.
Yeah.
He does. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, it seemed like when you hear about, his contemporaries in the 60s would have been people like Grant Green and Wes Montgomery.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were trying to make, I think, sort of a cutting contest between, not George himself, but it seemed like people were trying to compare, who's the hottest guitarist? Is it George Benson? Is it Wes Montgomery? Is it Grant Green? But, if you ask George, I think he would say, nothing but just, just about both Grant and Wes, in maybe in different respects, but nothing but the highest respect for both of them, So yeah, just a super supportive, musician in the community, guitarist in the community, to other musicians, guitarists, and it's really interesting career, very interesting career trajectory as well, into pop music, seemingly without really sacrificing any integrity in his playing. His playing just crossed that transition. Actually, one thing I was going to mention was, funnily enough, I had a really hard time. I had one friend who had a few jazz records in high school. I had a very difficult. It took me quite a long time to actually. Sort of get, quote unquote hip to what to listen to. Right. Even like I was into my 20s by the time I bought my first Miles Davis record, because somebody said buy anything with Miles Davis, John Coltrane or Bill Evans on it. So I went,
it's good advice.
Kind of Blue has them. They're
all three
on here. Yeah. And then I just went off from there. Sort of lost my train of thought there, but. You were George Benson. Yeah. The first record that I actually heard was in a restaurant. Yeah. Was this record that he did in the 80s with Earl Klugh. I don't know if you know who Earl Klugh is, but he's a nylon string player. Also an amazing guitarist. And they had this duo record, and it's basically a smooth jazz record. Yeah. But George is playing like George. And when I heard this, I was just knocked out. Like you. I mean, I came up in I started playing in the 80s, basically, mid 80s, 84, 85. And, I was interested in Hendrix. I was interested in Clapton, and then through them, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and then, back to Buddy Guy and Albert King, B.B. King, of course, and, so I'd listened to a lot of blues, and you started to figure out some of that by ear, and so you start to get an ear for this blues vocabulary, and then you hear George, but he's got so much of the blues in his playing, right? But then there's this; it's on a technical level and on a time level. Like he's just got so much sort of pop and incredible phrasing, and on this record, it just jumped out at me. It's just like, who is this? Yeah. And so I asked the server at the restaurant, and they said, they brought the tape cassette jacket over to me.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I took note, and the next day I went out and I bought the record, not knowing that George had all this amazing history. And it took me another 10 years to, then I heard a friend of mine had Lonnie Smith live at Mozambique with which is just so funky, crazy, you know. And then to think, I remember sitting in his car listening to my friend Jeff Hicks, listening to that record, and our minds were just blown by the whole thing, not just George, but then Lonnie, right? Yeah. And then years later, I ended up playing with Lonnie thanks to Cory, which was a crazy
full circle moment.
Sort of. I mean, I was not ready for it. Let's just put it that way. But I mean, that's going to be a highlight of my life. You know, regardless of what happens. Basically, and what has happened from then to now, it was really incredible. So of course through that, getting to know George Benson's other albums, The Cookbook, and that's Lonnie Smith on that as well from back in the 60s. And anyway, George. But so playing with Brian, like with his love of Jack McDuff. I mean, I just, it's interesting because some of the writing on that album, like there's a few Jack McDuff tunes, but Brian's writing on the album is a bit of a departure from what you'd hear the McDuff band doing. Some of it is definitely like right in the bag, like the second single, the way he's arranged, the way he's arranged the guitar.
What's that one called? It's is that his writing?
That's his tune. Why'd you have to go and lie to me, boy? That one.
Yeah, why'd you have to go and lie to me, boy? That's
So there's a story behind that.
Because I was like, this must be like an Aretha Franklin song or something.
Well, no, but it's very much. I could very much hear that band, the Joe Dukes, Jack McDuff, Benson, and Red Holloway band, and just the way he arranged the guitar and the organ. That's exactly the type of harmony that Jack McDuff would have set up for that group. So that was really, it was exciting to play. And plus Brian is he's a musician of the highest order, just in terms of time and just his command of the instrument. It's he sets, and the organ is a very powerful instrument. When there's somebody with that degree of skill behind the organ. There's so
many things you can control.
Well,
exactly.
There's
so many parameters, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Just not just the sound, but the groove and dynamics.
Yeah.
Like they can absolutely, a good organist can absolutely control the dynamics, and so Brian was like that. So it felt, it was having a few gigs under our belt, and then going into that session, it was just sort of going along for the ride with Brian, and Brian was so easy in the studio.
Oh, cool.
It was just like a revelation, like how the session went, because I've been on both, I haven't recorded a lot. I would say I've recorded.
You mean of yourself? Like
of my own records. I mean, I've been a sideman, but so like the Nightcrawlers records, we have a few records, but most of those were recorded live.
Right.
One, I think one or two of them were a studio recording. So I didn't have a ton of experience actually, recording in the studio. But, just having been an engineer for, the past couple of decades, I know how recording sessions go that I'm engineering. And I swear, like, I arrived at the studio at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and we were finished at 8 p.m., 8:30.
Whoa.
And out of the studio.
The whole thing?
The whole record.
Whoa. Not bad. That's a good turnaround.
But part of it was just him, like, there were things that if it were up to me, I was like, well, I wouldn't mind another crack at that. And he was like, no, that's good. So it was like maximum 2 takes. We even took a break and went out and took photos. And
oh, great.
Yeah. So I mean, it just,
he's made a lot of records.
He has made a lot of records.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of but he was just very calm about the whole thing. And he actually said that we were all set up in the same room right next to each other. So it was
nice.
I mean, the Leslie was off to the side of the room and sort of a crook of the room, so it was slightly isolated from everything.
Right.
Cory was in the room with us in the sort of the doorway to a booth. We talked about putting my amp in the next room, but we said, let's just try it out here. We'll just put this little baffle around it. So I was sitting right next to the organ, and it's a small room.
Wow.
This is Arrow Studios. This is
Arrow Studios.
Yeah. Oliver Conway's studio.
Okay.
In East Van there.
Nice.
He's it's the basement of a building that used to be Rocky Mountain Sound. The warehouse for Rocky Mountain Sound. So he's just down in the basement there, and he's been there for years.
Okay, cool.
And he's got this beautiful B3 organ down there. So that's, Cory has rented his B3 for events for years.
Okay.
And then he learned that that Oliver had the studio down there. And he said, well, next time I have an organist in town, we're going to come down and make a record down here. So I think he'd already done some sessions down there. So this was, maybe the second or third session that Cory's brought down there.
Yeah. So then they have it. Yeah, they have it down. Then they have it down with science.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess like how many records do you have in the studio? Like from that weren't live that you've been on, yeah.
That I've been on. Oh, I wish I counted, but I mean, it's actually a bit difficult to count because there's some things that we do are just like a few tunes or a demo, or sometimes you go in and do a session and you don't really follow up on it, but then maybe years later it's like, there's that. Oh, I didn't know that record had come out.
Right. Yeah.
So, but I think
happen,
primarily, I mean, there's a as far as the Nightcrawlers are concerned, I think there's 5 records with the Nightcrawlers. And I'm on all of them. And I think it's 5. Presenting down the bottom, volume 3. Yeah, 5 records that we've done. And we've been, I mean, the first one we did in 2006, I think, or something like that. So it's been almost 20 years.
Wow.
And during that time as well, I was also involved with this band called Inhabitants. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, with band. You and JP.
With JP and
JP Carter.
Sky Brooks and Pete Schmidt. And which was a really different thing. We were on a label, Jesse Zubot's label.
Okay.
Drip Audio. And I also had another project which was actually a precursor to that, which was called Carsick. Was with JP and I, we had a trumpet and guitar.
Oh, just the two of you.
Just the two of us, and that was actually the first. That group existed before Inhabitants, and I don't know if you were around during the Sugar Refinery days, but
no,
there was.
I've heard of the Sugar Refinery, but
there was a cool little club on. It was actually a restaurant on Granville Street, and it was just at Granville and Helmkin. Upstairs, really, sort of hidden away. And I think I did a couple of little jazz gigs up there with probably Colin Maskell and actually John Ram of Afterlife Studios.
Okay.
We were neighbors at that time, and I think he may have told me about it. I can't remember what happened first, if I'd played there, or if we. But we ended up just, meeting. We lived in right next door to each other, and we were chatting about it. And we ended up deciding to form a band, an organ trio.
Cool.
with an organist friend of ours, a keyboardist named Mike Kenny, who's still plays a lot on the scene and plays with all kinds of touring bands and plays keyboards and guitar. He's a great guitarist as well.
Oh, wow.
But was really into playing the organ at that point. So we had an organ trio. And so we, and through Cory, as at that point, he was tipping me off to these Crisscross records. So Melvin Ryan records with Peter Bernstein. We have to talk about Peter Bernstein.
Oh, man, yeah.
So these Crisscross records, Peter Bernstein, and then some of them were trio. There was some with Eric Alexander, Joshua Redman is on one. There's one with, I can't remember the names of these, unfortunately, but so, and of course these, these records totally blew me away, and hearing Peter, of course, was just like a revelation, and, and so we were trying to play some of that music pretty much. Like I was, lifting the tunes off those records.
Sweet.
And we were doing that in the Sugar Refinery.
Awesome.
And I was playing some other gigs there. Colin Maskell on saxophone, James Forrest on bass, and JP, and had a cover gig. He was playing in a cover band across the street. And he would come across. They'd come across on their set breaks.
Nice.
Yeah, they had these like 6-night-a-week cover gigs.
Oh, awesome.
On Granville Street at that time. And JP and Scott Sanft would come over and sit in with us on these jazz gigs. And that's how JP and I sort of got to know each other. And, and I mentioned that John Ram and I lived next door. JP was John Ram's roommate, so he also lived next door.
Oh, okay.
So anyway,
so he just happened to be your room.
Anyway, so
your neighbor.
As the years went on, I mean, this was in the 90s, and so I went away to Toronto. I went to school at U of T.
U of T, right?
Yeah, I got my undergrad from U of T in 99, 2000, and then decided to come back. And
are you from Vancouver originally?
From Vancouver.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Originally, I was actually born in West Vancouver. Or sorry, I was born in North Van, but grew up in West Van.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, so JP and I were just kind of on each other's radar, and then we're when I came back from Toronto, I was back and doing gigs in the sugar refinery, and we just why don't we try this this duo project? So we wrote some music and did some improvising together, and then Sky, the drummer, Sky Brooks, was playing there a lot at the time as well. I don't know if you ever met Sky, but
I haven't met Sky. I know him. Yeah, the drummer.
Yeah, fantastic musician, and what a great guy. So I remember Sky. I remember the moment when we were playing at the sugar refinery, and Sky was eating dinner in front of us, and I could tell he was enjoying the music. And then after the set, he's like, "Hey, I really want to play with you guys. I want to try, something with Karsik and me as a drummer." And we thought, oh yeah, that'd be really cool. Let's do it. And then we decided
That's bold.
And we also knew, and Sky's best friend and roommate at the time was Pete Schmidt, the electric bassist. And then we just started thinking, well, why don't we just get Pete and we'll have a quartet? We'll just. And I honestly, I think I have a hard time remembering like even our first rehearsal or even our first gig. It just seemed to be this thing that sort of happened.
You were just sort of
and. And suddenly, we had a gig at, I can't remember where our first gig. It probably would have been the sugar refinery again.
Yeah, I feel like that can happen sometimes in like that era or like that age when you're like kind of, if you happen to find yourself in sort of it sounds like you were in like this sort of like young creative nucleus.
Well,
right?
I guess so. I mean,
And so like you just have these ideas of just like, okay, well, we're a band now.
Yeah.
And instead of rehearsing, you just book a gig.
Yeah, exactly. And
I think that happened to me once. Like I had a group that I started with my friend John Nicholson in our last year at CAP. And it was with all these awesome players. It was me and him and a drummer named Andrew Thompson, who's a really great composer as well. Alex Dobson, who's a bass player, who also went out east and then came back, and Matt Chaboter, the pianist who now lives in Copenhagen. And we started this band, and we ended up playing two gigs. And yeah, I don't think we ever had one rehearsal. I think it was just bring your tunes. We played one show at El Barrio and then one show at the Presentation House, and I think that's all it ever was. Cool. But like those are, I don't know, those are great. I love hearing about that kind of thing. But the Inhabitants obviously ended up being more than just two shows.
Oh yeah. I mean we did 3 albums.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was more music in the works as well, but it just became harder and harder to keep it together. It felt like, just when we were all sort of splitting off into different directions. I mean, JP, he was on everybody's record. Still is. He's very active, and was getting a lot of studio work. But he was in 2 major touring bands. So he was in Dan Mangan's band. Right. End of the 2010s.
I feel like Dan Mangan, he fed a lot of horn players in the 2010s, eh?
He did. Yeah, he did. It was him and I'm going to forget his name because I feel bad because I went to school with him. But the saxophonist from Toronto that was, what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about Destroyer maybe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because that was all happening concurrently. But anyway, so JP was on the road a lot. But he was still writing a lot of music, and we still did a couple of gigs, and JP had all this. We had an album easily, and actually I found a voice memo on my phone the other day of one of our rehearsals. I was listening to it, our final rehearsals before. I think we did a gig at 8 East or something like 5 years ago or something. And I was like, oh, what a drag that we didn't get to record this music.
Yeah.
And there was a batch of tunes that we did when we had a residency at the Western Front as well.
Okay. Yeah.
That I recorded. We had a Pro Tools rig there, and we were
Cool.
we had basically a week, or maybe it was two, to basically rehearse and record these songs, and we did that.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't release it as a record. But it culminated in a show at the end of it. But so we did record a lot, and we traveled quite a lot together. We went to Europe, we went to Germany.
Awesome.
We did a festival in this place called Mars. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but in near Dusseldorf in Germany.
Okay.
I guess that was around 2008.
Nice.
I think it can be. I think our set can still be found on YouTube somewhere.
Whoa. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. I was terrified. I was just so terrified. It was such a huge venue. Like Dewey Redman John Schofield was playing on the stage later. I was like, oh man, I don't know. I don't know if I belong here. But it was a great experience. And we traveled a lot in Canada as well. Did a trip down, a tour down the west coast of the U.S. as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So
did you find you were how, for people who haven't heard the Inhabitants, how would you describe the Inhabitants?
Well, it's very different. I mean, it was definitely not swing.
It's not organ trio.
No, it was not. It was a real departure. And I mean, just coming up through, I was really sort of, I guess, the music I grew up with was Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, ZZ Top to some degree.
Okay, yeah.
So I was just kind of, I was letting those influences just kind of flow, and then also, just everything, I'd thought about just in terms of composition and sounds and different types of linear playing and things that I'd been studying when I was in Toronto. I mean, I wouldn't say that I've, it was definitely a phase where I was really interested in 20th century music and not necessarily tonal music and even 12-tone music. And I wrote some things when I was there. And so it was kind of this melding of my earliest roots and then some of these concepts and things that, and then it was just JP who was just one of these musicians where he could just play one note and you just realize, wow, this music is just wide open.
Yeah.
I could literally play anything and it's going to work. And all of those guys were like that, even though it was kind of like, it could be sort of just like a grooving sort of, almost like a rock band. Sometimes there was this element of just sensitivity with everybody where everybody, it was maybe the first time I really felt that kind of chemistry where just, even time wise or anything would work, and, and those guys really, it was, Sky was really comfortable with odd meters in a really organic way, and then, and JP's whole sonic palette was, really inspiring. And Pete was amazing too, just this amazing bass player, just holding it down, but also just had his own sort of textural world as well that he kind of brought to it. So yeah, it was a really neat thing. It's interesting to reminisce about it.
Yeah. You got to get the band back together.
Well, you never know. I mean, Sky's moved to the interior, and we spoke on the phone a few months ago, and he's doing well. But yeah, you never know. You never know.
That's funny. I've always known you as this this guitarist who has a lot of range, like. Because when I first started hearing you play was when I started going out to shows, basically in the city, around like 2010, like in my first year at CAP, and like trying to go to as many shows as I could. And I saw a lot of you around then. Like you were a big influence on me, man. Like I remember going out. I don't know what my first show seeing you was. It could have been at the Cellar on a Tuesday night for B3 Beatdown with Chris Jestrin and Jesse Cahill. It could have been one of those shows because I was going to those pretty religiously. Or it could have been like a super free show at 1067 with like Chad Makla and Bernie Rye, and Joe Poole. A double drummer.
That probably would have been like like a Love Supreme or something. Like
it could have been
Chad playing
that. Yeah. It could have been that. I mean, there was a time where there was a show there every week.
There was, yeah.
On Friday nights.
Definitely, yeah.
And you were, and like I think maybe I can't remember if it was that or if it was it, but I just remember being able, like, you were reliably at both of those shows.
Which was a bit odd. It was like a bit of a split personality thing, you know.
Yeah, but it worked. It was like that's Dave Sikula, man. Like you're playing your what was your jazz box at that time?
Well, I had an ES 175,
the 175,
which I would only use. I used that on Oregon gigs.
Yeah,
but I had this Telecaster.
The Telly,
that was like a custom built Telly that is. I still own it. I own all the pieces, but it's actually in pieces in my closet right now, unfortunately.
Oh.
But it will be resurrected at some point. But yeah, so for that Chad Makla gig and for a lot of those gigs and Inhabitants and all that was that sort of quote unquote Telecaster guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a bit weird, you know, and I just to split.
I wouldn't say weird. I'd say awesome. I'd say impressive.
Well,
to be able to occupy both of those worlds and like really fit in. Like, to me, there was nothing weird about it. To me, it was just like, oh, this is a guy who could just do it all. He can sit in this chair and go crazy with these pedals and make a lot of noise, and then he can also just like groove out. It was really cool.
Well, that's flattering to say. I mean, I don't know if I felt that way about it. I think I felt pretty divided about it, because I felt like there was, you know, and I've never really liked this aspect where sometimes you feel like there's almost a political division of certain musical camps. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've certainly never subscribed to that, but I shouldn't necessarily, you know, impose that. Though, because honestly, I think I have a lot of respect for people who just singularly focus on their thing. Like we're talking about Peter Bernstein, for example. I mean, to me, he's sort of the epitome of that. Like he's, you know, I mean, there are many musicians who are, you know, but he comes to mind. He's somebody I think about a lot as just somebody who he heard a sound, or he found his sound early on, and he's just refined and grown with that and built that. And there's no pedals. It's just guitar straight into the amp. Totally. It's in the hands, and he's going to develop that over a lifetime. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You know, and I think that's rubbed off on people like yourself and people like me. You know, and that definitely would have been the thing. You know, not that I was ever feeling like I would ever be on you know, on a level with somebody like, you know, like Peter, but with the Nightcrawlers, it's like, you know what, I'm going to leave all the pedals at home. I'm just going to plug the arch stop straight into the amp, and I'm just going to force myself to do it like this. And then with the other stuff, that's kind of, it was kind of all about that, you know, those textures and using pedals, electronics, using, you know, just using and abusing, you know, technology to create.
Yeah, there is something very indulgent about like using pedals and like using, like, as a guitar player, where it's just like putting so much work into you know, like you play one note and then it's just like, let's see how far we can stretch this, and it's almost kind of like it's very there's just something that feels kind of self-congratulating about it, but I think that's probably, like, you know, a flawed way of looking at it, because I mean, I see someone like you or anybody else who's like really, you know, digging into the bag of tricks in that way, and like coming out with like an amazing sound and like something that's completely different, and I don't think that there's anything contrived about it at all. I think it's like when it's done in that way, it's like it's just an exploration, and like, you know, the way you're describing like the Inhabitants, it's like you were describing it like it was just something like really freeing and something that was really maybe cathartic, right? Like being able to reach in and bring out these influences that maybe you push to the side, trying to stay true to like the jazz tradition, right? Like you can't do a lot of bending, like note bending or anything if you want to be super jazzy, like and I think that's great. I think it's really cool to be able to have that situation and be able to have that. Maybe did that feel kind of like an outlet for you, or do you feel like maybe it was
Well, let me just say that I was just a few thoughts popped into my head while you were talking about with what you were saying there, and really I think I just thought of it as an expanded palette, you know.
Yeah.
You know, so honestly, I didn't think about it too much differently than I do even plugging straight into the amp. You know, plugging straight into the amp is, you know, you have to come to terms with the fact that that's your reality.
Yeah.
And any nuances with the sound are going to come with, you know, sure, you can vary your, you know, how wide open the guitar is or how rolled off it is. And then just what your touch is on the instrument dynamically.
Totally, yeah.
And that's your palette, you know,
Yes.
whereas with the pedals, that becomes like an extension of the palette, you know, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I think it is like it's an extension of the function of the instrument too, right? Because if you're going straight into the amp, it's a lot more exposed, it's a lot more intimate, right? You can get away with a lot less. But with the pedals, like you have to be careful, and like you have to understand how it works. It's like for me, it's like super intimidating.
Well, that's a very good point. I think what you say, because if you overindulge with the electronics, and I you know, guilty as charged over here. You know, I'm 100% positive.
I love it though. I love it. Yeah.
No, but people know, right? Like, you know, you have to give credit to your audience. Like you can't just sort of serve, you know, just relentless stuff, you know, like if there's no sort of, you know, means or to what it is that you're putting out there, whether you're straight into the amp or whether you're going through 10 pedals on the ground or whether you have a rack next to you or whatever it is, then people are going to pick up on that. So it can sort of feel like a bit of wrangling sometimes with the electronics because it's like, okay, I've got all these possibilities, but I still have to keep it focused, and I still have to, you know, I'm still, you know, we are, you know, in the case of Inhabitants, like we very rarely would just improvise. We were playing songs. Mm-hmm. You know, so there's always like, oh, is this the right sound for this song? And I would work really hard on, like, you know, just like, no, this is the perfect sound for this, but it's not perfect for this. What sound does this need? And then I would think about, you know, what I have available to me here in front of me or at home or whatever. What can I utilize to, create that sound. So yeah, it was, you know, thinking back to it, it was just kind of but I did like to limit myself because some people like to really go wild, and sometimes I see people sometimes like, oh, I got a new pedal this week, I'm checking this out now, you know. It's like, and they'll bring it out on the gig and it's like, well, I could never do that, you know. Like I sat with like the same 5 pedals in front of me for like 12 years.
Oh yeah.
Because and I think part of it, I'm a bit conservative by by nature, and I think part of it was just that, like, okay, no, I know these, I know what they do. I don't want to really introduce it's almost like introducing, to me it's like if I put another pedal in the chain, it's almost like adding another maybe I'm being overly dramatic, but it's almost like adding another member of the band, and and dealing with that chemistry that brings.
No, I get
right?
that completely. Yeah,
So
because I mean, if it's because you're talking about a band,
yeah.
you're talking about a band like a capital B band where it's like the same 4 people, and if it's not, then it's a different band, right? It's not like the Dave Sikula quartet.
Well, true. Like, and you know as well as I, like if you've got your band and and this can be a great, like, don't get me wrong, this can be a great thing, but you swap out one member, it does not feel the same. You're playing the same tunes. You might even call the exact same tempo.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to feel different.
It's going to feel different, yeah.
And and that musician is every bit as great as the musician that was there before. But it's like, whoa, okay, this feels different. You know, even though 75% of this 4-piece band is the same as it was last week.
Yeah, it has different. The band has different DNA, right?
Yeah.
Like, and like in the jazz tradition, that's like part of it. That's like to be expected. Like you play with someone new, you get a new sound, and that's exciting because it's so improvisational on its own. Mm-hmm. So you get used to this new feel throughout playing, and it becomes just a new thing, right? Like you hear the way this player plays with this player on these old records, and it's great to hear all the different combinations, right? And like when you're playing with new people, it's fun, and it's just part of kind of the game, in a way. I mean, like, not to say there aren't like great bands in the jazz tradition, like the John Coltrane Quartet or like Brad Meldau's trio or whatever. Like those are like bands that like have a sound, and like it'd be amazing to be able to do that. But in the jazz world, like everyone's so busy, like it's part of the tradition. You're always going to be playing with different people, and so to have like a band, that actually makes a lot of sense. So like if you have like a new pedal on your pedal board that's going to make a completely new sound, it is a new contribution, right? Like, so I don't think that's overly dramatic. I think that's actually a really apt way of describing it. And it also just speaks to how like sensitive you are to that kind of thing. And actually that makes me wonder, like, you're obviously a sound engineer. What would you say, you're a recording engineer, like what would you say is your title when it comes to making records, being on this side of the... Oh. We're sitting at Demitone Records, by the way.
Demitone Studio.
Yeah, Demitone Studio. Sorry.
And no, that's okay. And that's a good question.
It's where they make records.
Yeah, I would just say audio engineer,
Yeah.
I've worn, sort of various hats, over the years, like somebody's, people on occasion, like I've been fortunate enough that they've approached me to say, oh, can you be the producer on this? But I would say that's a handful of times. And it's, I would say it's been those were great experiences. I'd say, from what I remember, they went well. And I did enjoy that, particularly the opportunity to work with another audio engineer who's actually at the helm, doing what I normally do and looking at how they do things and that sort of thing. But I would say like 90% of the time, I'm the guy in the chair.
Yeah.
Audio engineer. And again, like audio engineer is a pretty broad term, just like jazz is a broad term.
Yeah.
There's some audio engineers that I can think of right now. Like if I think of somebody like, John Ram at Afterlife Studios or Eric Nielsen at Afterlife. I mean, not only are both of those guys incredible audio engineers, but they can take apart any microphone, any amplifier, any piece of gear in that studio, and they can trace down a problem.
Wow.
I'm not that audio engineer. I mean, I have some of those skills on a very surface level, but maybe to the point where I can trace down where I think a problem is, and then I actually bring it to a tech, and they tell me I'm wrong. It's actually this. But I'll fix it for you, kind of thing. So, another term that's that I've heard used for the kind of thing that I feel like I end up doing a lot of the time is a balance engineer, which is essentially, it was probably a title in Abbey Road Studios or something like that, because they had, somebody wearing a white lab coat that would do a specific engineering, somebody would be doing repairs, and this person only does balances on the faders. Not that I'm comparing myself to those people, but honestly, that's where I find myself, is sort of sitting in a chair in front of speakers, mixing, a lot of time, and also recording groups, of course, I'm doing that.
Setting up the space. Like placing mics.
Yeah, I love that part of it. I mean, I have a lot of anxiety around it, and I don't know, I put it this way, it's you've got 26 microphones plugged into a console.
Yeah.
It's exciting on one level, but there's a lot that can go wrong.
Yeah.
A
lot of variables.
And you want to make sure that you don't get 7/8 of the way through the session only to find, you mean I had that on the whole time?
Yeah.
It's just like, especially when you've got a jazz group that has one day to make a record.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not saying, it's this,
I can only imagine. We have two SM58s plugged into a little Zoom recorder right now, and I'm constantly watching the levels right now, making sure that it's recording. We've already run into a snag once.
That's good engineering right there.
I'm doing my best Dave Sikula impression right now.
No, and you got the mic gain nice and low. That's good to see.
Oh yeah, low volume.
Yeah,
low volume.
You can always boost it up later. But anyway, yes. So. Yeah, I thought maybe that question might come up, because sometimes I ask myself, like what do I? Am I a guitarist? Oh. Am I an audio engineer? Like, which is?
I didn't mean it in an existential way.
Okay, it's me that's turning it into that type of crisis.
I know that's what you do. I know you as a guitarist. You're a guitarist to me, but but I also know that you're a very good audio engineer. You've made some of my favorite records. Like you recorded some of them, like that Peter Bernstein Live at the Cellar record from 2013.
Yeah,
that one it's so good.
I'm glad you enjoy that.
I
and that was a real labor of love, and and you know what? It's been great to. I guess technically, is it a Peter Bernstein or a Tilden Webb record? Or I guess it's a Peter Bernstein record.
Well, it's Peter Bernstein. Like he's got the big title on it. It's with the Tilden Webb Trio.
Yeah. And I thought that was such a magical moment in time. And just
you can tell.
Can I tell the story about that?
Please.
Because Cory was, I think, because Cory was always had his, we haven't talked about Cory Weeds. Cory Weeds, like, just what a special just a hugely influential person for me. In fact, maybe we can talk a bit more about Cory, because he's not only is he important to on a global level in terms of keeping the music.
Yeah, he really is at this point. Yeah,
going. For me personally, like he was a huge influence on me from the early '90s. Really,
Wow.
But we can come back to that or not, maybe in the next part 2 of this podcast.
Yeah, I think we might need a part 2.
Now I forgot what I was going to mention about Cory.
Well, we were talking about making records. I brought up the Peter Bernstein record.
Oh yes. Yeah. So Cory, he had his eye. I think he was looking at what Smalls was doing with the live streams, because Smalls was an early adopter. This was long before COVID ever hit. They had the security cam.
That's right. Sort of. They still do.
And they still do. Which is amazing.
They have that feed on YouTube now.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love checking it out. Any opportunity I can get. And I think it's a really great thing. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I think he saw that Smalls, that Spike Wilner had that set up, and that he was doing that. And I think he wanted to get that set up in the cellar.
At the cellar, yeah.
And so I think he brought me in, and I'm not even sure if we were able to get video happening for that, or maybe there was video, maybe there wasn't. But the only thing that I was asked to do was just live to 2-track recording of the show. And of course, going into it, leading up to it, I'm just thinking, okay, this mix has got to be perfect. It's Peter Bernstein.
So live to 2-track meaning mixed to stereo?
Mixed to stereo, baked in.
Okay,
that's the mix at the end of the night,
Yeah, so that's,
So, of course I was going to do that for Cory, but then I'm just thinking in my head, how can I also ensure on the back end, like if I make a mistake or that I can go back and maybe correct it or remix it or something. Cory didn't ask me to do anything to do with multi-track. I don't care how you do it. He said, we just need a live to 2-track mix. You can even use the in-house Mackie mixer on the wall if you can figure out how to do it. Get a board tape. I don't care. Yeah. I'm just paying you to get a 2-track mix. And so I prepared for that and figured out how I was going to do it. But then I figured, okay, if I do it this way, I can also capture multi-track. Yeah. So there were 2 nights, and I ended up capturing multi-track for both nights. And I think he released it immediately because that was the whole idea with this 2-track thing, is that they were made available via the Cellar Live website.
Okay.
The next day or even that week or something.
Yeah, it can't have been that long after. Yeah.
Yeah, and so of course, and there's 2 nights of material, just incredible music.
Yeah.
And but then I had these multi-tracks, and so I said, "Listen, Cory, I captured multi-track here." He's like, "Well, I wasn't planning on it, but I'll talk to Peter and I'll ask him, if he's interested in making a record." Mm-hmm. And Peter was totally on board. Like Peter is very, at least at that time, he was very easygoing. It's seemingly about, it's like, sure, sounds good. Music felt good to me. Band felt great. I'm sure there's some great stuff in there.
Yeah.
So I sent him rough mixes. He chose some takes. And it was a labor of love for me. I was mixing in my bedroom at the time when I was living at St. Catharines and Broadway.
Wow.
And I had a nice little setup, and I chipped away at that, and I was really proud of it.
Yeah.
By the end of it, and I was, of course, with Peter, I wanted to make sure he was happy with it, and he was like, "Yeah, no, sounds good." And I was like, "Okay, great, amazing." And but it's been great to hear, from just to hear that from you, and also there's even. A friend, Mathieu Soucy from Montreal.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you know him. He's a great guitarist. Yeah. And he said, "Oh man, you're the guy who did recorded Peter Bernstein."
That record, like among like people, because there's like, there's a there's like a whole like subculture of like guitarists who are like into Peter Bernstein, of course, and like that's like considered one of his best records. Like Live at the Cellar with the Tilden Webb Trio. Like most people who are into Peter Bernstein are like, that one's like one of the best. It's so good.
Yeah.
And it sounds amazing. And yeah, like of course, like they're all like A game. Like everybody is like playing out of their mind on like, I wish I had been there. I went and saw that same band in 2014. Mm-hmm. They played another show. Yeah. And that was the first time I got to meet Peter Bernstein and sneak a lesson with him. But yeah, man, that must have been like, was that your first experience recording at the Cellar?
It wasn't the first.
Okay.
I'd recorded a few things there before.
Okay.
I think leading up to that, was it a Monday series there? Improvised music. It was like a Now. Now sponsored.
Yep.
I played it, maybe 1 or 2 of them. I had a trio. And a few people asked me to record. And so I came into the Cellar, and so I was familiar with the setup.
Okay.
And, but that was the Peter Bernstein record. Around that time, it was one of the earlier ones for Cory for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then shortly after that would have been Mike Ledon.
Okay, cool.
And his trio record is called Speak with Joe Farnsworth and John.
John Weber?
John Weber, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible trio. And then Steve Caldestad recorded his quartet record with that trio.
The same trio.
The same weekend.
Oh, wow.
So at I still had all the gear set up.
Yeah. Oh, great.
And it was just, and then Steve didn't record in front of an audience. It was just, but it was in the Cellar. We recorded in the Cellar, and I really liked how that record turned out as well. That was Let It Go, I think is the name of that record. Steve Caldestad, Let It Go. named after the Stanley Turrentine composition. But a very cool record, and that was really, really fun to work on. And then I did later on. I recorded Louis Hayes there, which was really, really nerve-wracking.
Yeah, wow.
But very exciting.
Yeah,
you know, that was a very interesting experience. You know,
that was a great time.
Yeah,
in the city. Just like the amount of people that came out to the cellar at that time.
Oh yeah. Well, Frankie's is still great. You know,
of course. Yeah.
I mean, it's not. I mean, Cory. The fact that he had stake and ownership of the cellar was crazy. You know? But the funny thing is just to talk about, go back to Cory. I remember before I knew him, we were at CAP at the same time in the early 90s.
Right.
He showed up and, he was like the real life version of Bart Simpson, basically. Like he was wearing
the spiked hair.
Yeah, he had the spiked blonde hair, and he was wearing all red. I remember he was wearing red shorts.
Early night, that's on Vogue. He's just
no, he looked good, and I remember, and you can his voice, like you can hear his voice from across the room.
Yeah,
in a good way. In a good way, he projects, and I remember he was talking with Steve Swanson, this other saxophone player, about the Sonny Rollins concert, and I was like, wow, these guys just saw Sonny Rollins. And I remember, I think it was that conversation, the first time I heard Cory Weeds, first time I literally heard his voice and became aware of him. I think he was already talking about someday opening a jazz club.
Wow.
So that was this wasn't something that came about late 90s.
Yeah.
This was always on his radar. And later on, I ended up in a band with him, a touring.
Oh, cool.
Like a original funk band.
Yeah.
And we ended up touring back and forth, across the country. We went to Italy for a couple of months as well at one point. So I spent a lot of time with him.
Yeah.
But coming back to Cory, I owe him a lot, because when we would go on the road, particularly the trip to Europe, we had a lot of time to kill. We would play duo.
Cool.
Like all day long.
Wow.
Like we literally busked.
Whoa, cool.
Downtown Rome together. I was playing this janky steel string acoustic guitar. We were playing bebop tunes.
Really?
On the street in Rome. Cory Weeds and I in the mid 90s, and I knew nothing.
Wow.
And he just sat with me for hours and hours. He didn't care, and he was playing great because Cory has such great time and his melody, and he knew all the heads, and so I would just try and keep up with him, just play the changes, and then have to play solo. Have to. He would give me space to play, and I would have to try to hold it together.
Yeah.
So, I pretty much owe everything in terms of playing tunes to.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
To Cory, 100%. Him and Jerry Cook as well. Jerry Cook was another guy early on that kind of like had a lot of patience. We did some duo gigs together. I don't know if you know Jerry, but
I don't know Jerry.
Yeah, fantastic tenor saxophonist. He's in the he does a lot of blues gigs. He's still very active out there in the scene, but him and I were, we played in that same band together before Cory had joined the band, and we used to listen to Stanley Turrentine cassettes in the band and stuff. So between Cory and Jerry, those two guys, for me, they were the guys.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's a cool little piece of trivia about you and Cory playing duo in the streets of Rome.
Oh yeah.
That's
crazy.
That's an amazing image.
Yeah, we didn't have a license or anything. Like we were.
Oh, of course not.
Yeah, we were getting kicked out of. We were in front of the Pantheon at one point.
Wow. Do you have any photos?
No. I wish.
Man,
I wish.
That's
was quite a time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You guys need to make a duo record.
Oh, maybe.
That would be so cool.
No, I love playing with Cory. Cory is, he's just another one of these guys. He's like, he does it all,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He sounds great on the new record. Obviously.
He sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
And, he's always really down on his playing. Like both him and I are always commiserating about our own playing.
Self-loathing.
But I think he sounds great. I mean, and he's just created such a great thing, for everybody.
Yeah, man. And he's got a lot going on. He's making a lot of records.
He does. Yeah. Anyway, I don't. Again, this might be for part 2 of the podcast.
Yeah, we might need a part 2, but I just wanted to get down to really quick. So, how long has audio engineering been part of your? Has that been like your gig?
Well, okay. How long has it been my gig? I mean, that's a little nebulous. I would say.
Were you like recording like early on? Was that like a?
Well, I don't. I know we don't have this kind of time, but just very briefly. I mean, I was thinking about this. Like when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I would just. We had my dad had a reel-to-reel tape recorder, just a consumer.
Sure.
He didn't even do anything with it. Like I never saw him use it. I never saw him. Mm-hmm. Maybe he taped like dumped a Leona Boyd LP onto it or something like that.
Yeah.
He loved Leona Boyd and we didn't have much of a record collection, but I guess that's why he bought it, because he was hoping to get a few of his records on tape. And I would play with it all the time and just record my voice, record my brother.
Yeah.
And once we had cassette, ghetto blasters.
So you were making podcasts. You were making
well, I'd have my friends sing along with like Jimi Hendrix records and record them singing, just as something that I thought was really fun. And, I'd always, and then I bought a little stereo mic, and anytime I had a friend over, I was fascinated with recording. Loved it.
That doesn't surprise me at all to learn that about you. You seem like the kind of guy who was into it at a young age.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why. I don't know what it was about it, but I was fascinated. And then once I started playing in bands, I just had a little Walkman with a stereo mic, just a cassette Walkman, just the cheapest one you could possibly get. But it had this terrible, it was terrible in the best way, stereo microphone that would just compress the crap out of everything. So you could put it anywhere on the stage. And then I would listen to the gigs after and just like I do now. I'll throw my phone down
with your voice memo
recording.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
And record the gig and just to hear what happened. And so that's kind of where it grew from there, because from out of that, the tape deck eventually petered out, broke down, and then we had mini disc recorders. I don't know if you remember those.
Yeah, mini disc, yeah.
Terrible format.
Yeah, short-lived format.
Awful digital, audio codec or whatever.
Bad experience.
And
they didn't work well.
Yeah, they
hard
didn't
to find
work.
the players.
Yeah, and they were the build quality was terrible, but I owned at least 2 of those, and I recorded everything. But I was excited because you got this fidelity. It's like, wow, it wasn't CD quality. It was not PCM
it was
audio.
Mini disc quality.
It was mini disc quality, but all the way through university, like Cap and U of T, I've got boxes of Chris, I have boxes of these mini discs.
Oh man!
And I have nothing to even. Sometimes I think about looking for a rack, like an actual a mini disc unit, just so I can dump them, digitize them properly. I mean, they're already digital, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was
eBay
really
for
into this idea of stereo recording, and then I got a decent stereo mic, a Sony stereo mic. Started figuring out where to put that and to get the best recording of a band, just to get the most balanced recording, enough bass, are the drums the right level, and really starting to figure that out. And then right into the Inhabitants, that's, I think, when around the time I got my first computer.
Right.
Up to that point, I just had PCs that weren't even capable of recording 10 seconds of audio without the hard drive filling up, because this is like early 2000s.
Smoking.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like an early G4 Mac laptop, and I got a very simple interface.
Yep.
And almost right away, I think actually I bought them from the estate of Chris Nelson, who used to basically own the studio that we're sitting in right now.
Wow.
Dave Say was responsible for selling off his collection of microphones.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And Chris Jessen already been through he was already into audio engineering, and he just, cleaned up. He just had this fantastic, and Dave Say, he kept a few for himself. Brad, I know, picked up a few things.
Yep.
And I got wind of it late and said, there's still a few things. And I came down, met up with Dave, and there was these Octava mics, actually, they're sitting right there in that cabinet. Wow. And they're just pencil condenser mics. And so once I had that computer, I bought a couple of XLR cables, and then I just started running around. I brought it to my gigs. I even brought it on tour and was getting these stereo recordings of the gigs. And and then I was like, oh, the stereo recording's great, but I'd like to hear more bass. I have got another channel here. I'll run an XLR to the bass amp. Then I'll have like a bass DI. It's 3-track recording. It's like, okay, well, wouldn't it be great if I had a mic over the drums now? Then it became 4-track recording. Oh, maybe I need a different kind of box now because I want 8 inputs.
Yeah.
And then so I just kept adding another channel. And then suddenly I was just looking at it going, okay, well, now I've got 8 tracks.
Yeah.
I guess I got to learn how to mix now.
Yeah.
Had no idea how to do that. So that was just massive trial and error.
Right.
It still is, but to some degree, but so it's just endless hours of just like listening to what, some of my biggest influences were, the recordings that Brad was mixing at the time, just because he was working on similar equipment, but his mixes sounded unbelievably good, just as good as anything that I would hear anywhere. So I was like, okay, how is he doing that? I've got the same stuff. My stuff sounds like crap, So so it's constantly just like me trying to mix something, A-B it with something Brad did, A-B it with something Chris Jestrin did, A-B it with something Rudy Van Gelder did.
Right, yeah.
A-B it with something James Farber did, and then just trying to up my game, and then slowly getting into situations like getting into this studio and suddenly, this is a 16-track studio. Because all I'd done up to that point were just location recordings, just things at the cellar, things at other venues. I'd just bring gear in and just set up mics and record and hope for the best and sort it out at home.
Yeah.
So studio recording came much later for me. So then I worked here for several years and then eventually I went into Monarch to do a session. And when I saw that space, I was just like, oh, this is incredible. Like, I've got to figure out a way to work here. So I ended up, doing some sessions just as a, people would hire me to come in and engineer their session in there. And then eventually Tom hired me. So I ended up getting a job at Monarch. And that was a big step for me because it was like, okay, it sounds funny, but I've never even worked at that point. I'd never even worked on a console before.
Right. Yeah.
I worked on little mixing boards or whatever. It's the same concept, but so this is an API, 1804 console. So that was a big step for me and a major, learning curve. So, and then that's, basically where I'm at, today. I'm not working at Monarch as much because I've got the job at, working up at Cap U, but I'm still working here at Demitone occasionally, and still working at Monarch occasionally. So, and still playing music.
Awesome. Yeah, you got a lot going on, man. I'm glad I was able to get you for an episode. And you've alluded to a part 2, and I think we do need to have a part 2 at some point because we are. I think we are running out of time here. So.
Oh, that's okay. That's good.
Yeah. Thanks so much for
Man, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for. Thank you so much for
providing the
me.
Space. And
oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, we should do it again. Maybe we'll do it Monarch next time.
Just
kidding.
I doubt it. That place.
Yeah. We'll get some of those really nice mics.
But thank you so much, Chris. Really
of course,
David.
It. Thanks as always for listening. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe if you aren't already. And if you are interested in staying up to date with the happenings in Vancouver's jazz scene, head over to rhythmchanges.ca and subscribe to the free weekly newsletter with exhaustive lists of upcoming shows, reviews, interviews from around the scene. Sign up today at rhythmchanges.ca. See you on the next one. Bye for now.